Thank you, Madam Speaker. Another question time, and again, no answers. Another day like every day under the Abbott government. New Liberal lies, new Liberal lows. Every day we see the quality of the parliament and the debasement of the government of Australia continue downwards. Now, there'll be 6 weeks from this place where we will all be able to have the opportunity to be amongst the Australian people. But we know what the Liberals will be up to. We know that those opposite will continue their trademark politics of fear and smear. We know the bar is never too low for those who sit opposite. Just have a look at their form in Victoria. Never in my wildest imagination would I imagine that the Liberal Party of Australia or any of its divisions would stoop so low, crawl so low, to be raising money on the back of national security fear. And quite frankly, it was an unsatisfactory answer today from the Prime Minister when he says, of course one would go down to ASIO for briefings. Probably true. Of course that may be true. But he could never explain why does he need a TV camera in tow. And then what he sought to do when the opposition legitimately questioned him on these matters is he said it's an attack on ASIO. This man is addicted to wrapping the flag of patriotism around him and then saying no one has the right to ever question the judgments of this government on that basis. But we know that every dirty trick will be played by this government, by this Prime Minister, in the next 12 months. They will keep going on the low road of character assassination. They will stick with the same bullying, the same base politics of division and suspicion. The last day of this sitting fortnight has been typical of every day under this government. This government and Mr Abbott will say anything to get your vote. They will say anything, they will do anything, they will promise everything. But his word means nothing, his promises mean nothing. Let me tell the government and Mr Abbott about this. If he wants to lecture us about lying, if he wants to keep on talking about keeping promises, if he wants to make the next election about trust, have a go. Give it a try. Bring it on. You know, today Mr Abbott postured in question time in the style which only he thinks befits a Prime Minister of this country, with his faux indignation and finger-wagging about an interview I did with Neil Mitchell 2 years ago. As I've said more than a couple of times, I made a mistake and I regret it. I did what Tony Abbott is incapable of doing. I have apologised. Tony Abbott has never apologised for the lies he told the Australian people, for the fraud he perpetrated on millions of hard-working people who trusted him with their vote. Never apologised for saying on the eve of the election, right down the barrel of a camera, capable of probably even tricking a lie-detected polygraph, he said to millions of Australians on the eve of that election, no cuts to health, no cuts to education, no cuts or changes to the pension, no cuts to the ABC or SBS. 5 broken promises in 10 seconds, 1 lie every 2 seconds. And the problem is that Mr Abbott's lies have consequences, real consequences for all Australians. His lies are hurting people every day. $30 billion cut from schools, $50 billion cut from hospitals. And for once and for all, will the government finally acknowledge the authorship of their own budget papers, which demonstrates the change in their spending profiles and the cuts behind it? This Prime Minister thinks that Australians are as silly as some of the people who back him in his parliamentary party. The truth is in black and white, green and blue. And he's also hurt 300,000 pensioners in this last sitting week. Modest incomes. He talks about some people who get $30 a fortnight being better off. But what he neglects to do, he presses the delete button at that point. He never mentions 330,000 pensioners who are having their pensions cut. He said before the election, no cut to pensions. 330,000 people are going to have their pensions cut. And he says because it doesn't happen until a certain date, that's not really a broken promise. This man has too many excuses and not enough truth in his election promises. He's frozen the superannuation of 8.4 million Australians. He says that there's no adverse consequences that they would administer on superannuation. But what he's done is he's frozen superannuation for 3.5 million Australians, low-paid Australians. He's taken away their tax support for the superannuation contributions they make. But it goes further than that. The Prime Minister for Indigenous Matters has cut $500 million from Aboriginal services. The Prime Minister for Women has cut $270 million from community services, including counselling for the victims of family violence. And we know this is just the beginning. This is a most miraculous government. They get their public servants, paid by taxpayers, working for months to talk to other senior officers all around the country. They prepare a Federation Green paper, and then they say, well, it's just a sensible discussion. Prime Minister, there is nothing sensible about an option which says you will take every dollar out of public hospital funding. Prime Minister, there is nothing sensible about cutting the 15-hour minimum per week guarantee to 4-year-olds. There is nothing sensible about means testing public schools and the parents who go to public schools. And when he says, but he has form on this, before the last election he said there would be no cuts to health. In fact, he continued to do it all around the streets of Brisbane before the Griffith by-election, where he said of his GP tax on the sick and the vulnerable, he said nothing's been proposed and nothing's been considered. Nothing's been considered, nothing's been proposed, nothing is planned. Mr Abbott's pattern is the same. All things to all people before an election, and afterwards please don't bother me. I'm about to break my promises. So I know what the next 6 weeks will be like with the government members. They will get out there and they will whip up fear. They will whip up smear. They will make it such that Australians feel more worried about their future than they even should be. And indeed, this is a government who's obsessed with the opposition. They don't want to stand up for Australia and fight for a vision of the future. The Prime Minister is never any happier when he's attacking us, but he's never any more unhappy when he actually has to run the government in the interest of the Australian people. They are fixated on the past. They are spending $80 million of taxpayer money trying to denigrate the reputation of the union movement. They are trying to turn baseless allegations into a headline. And on this subject, let me say to the most appalling acting Minister for Employment that this Commonwealth has ever had the misservice to have served in that position. He has said more than once in recent weeks, he said of my time in the AW representing working people, oh, he was there for the good times in Beaconsfield. Remember, he's implied that somehow Beaconsfield was a good time. Well, Christopher Pyne, I was at Beaconsfield. A man died. 2 men were trapped for 14 days, not knowing whether they'd be rescued. For the first 5 days, their families did not know if they were alive, and for the next 9 days, ordinary men dug through hard rock to rescue these, and it was a remarkable effort by hundreds of people. Their families went to hell and back. And Christopher Pyne is so out of touch, he says they were the good times. How dare you, Christopher Pyne? You are not fit. You are not fit to tie the shoelaces of those people in that rescue. So I say to the Prime Minister and to the government, we will never apologise for standing up and giving service to working people. Every day you talk about Labor, every day you talk about me, every day you look back to yesterday is another day that confirms you have nothing to say about the future. Nothing to say about Australians, their concerns, their priorities, and indeed the future of this country. Labor is better than that. It lasted a day. We saw that Minister for Immigration getting back into the gutter with his interjections and mindless contributions. Yesterday we were his best friends because they needed Labor to do the right thing for the nation. But these people have short memories, as I predicted yesterday. But we are different. We will support budget measures which we think are in the best interest of the nation. We will not be mindlessly negative, as this Prime Minister made his trademark of opposition. We are interested in the Australia of the future and setting up Australia for the future. That means making sure that there are jobs and skills for the workforce of the future and our young people of today. We want great schools, and yes, we want great coding in our schools. We want proper funding for our hospitals, not these rubbishy Federation Green papers which you propose with your madcap options. And we want universal Medicare. Australians are sick of you trying to wreck the Medicare system. We want accessible and affordable universities, not $100,000 degrees. We will fight youth unemployment and we will back TAFE all the way, training and apprenticeships. We believe in a fair pension and we believe in strong superannuation. In the next 6 weeks, we will outline our positive agenda. You can play your cheap political games all you like. You can take the low road. You can take the low road. You can do your very worst. But we will see you off. We will not only endure, we will most certainly prevail.